So there's a part of that 90-minute meeting between Trump and Netanyahu that didn't make the headlines. And I want to explain it to you. Because what was actually said in that room about Iran, it changes the entire picture of what comes next. Quick thing before we get into it, drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually read them. Let me take you back to what happened in Washington yesterday. 90 minutes. That's all it was. A 90-minute meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And in that hour and a half, a lot of things were said that the official readouts, they kind of glossed over. But one thing stood out. One thing that should terrify anyone who's been paying attention to the Middle East over the last 6 months. Netanyahu is skeptical about a deal with Iran. Now that sentence sounds simple enough, but when you actually unpack it, when you understand the context of where we are right now in the spring of 2026, that skepticism isn't just a diplomatic opinion. It's a warning. Let me explain what I mean. For months now, the Biden administration, then the Trump administration, they've been dancing around this idea of a new nuclear deal with Iran. You remember the old one, the JCPOA from 2015. Obama signed it, Trump pulled out of it in 2018, and ever since we've been in this weird limbo where Iran gets closer and closer to a bomb, and the world just watches. But here's the thing. The talks have been going on for a while, quietly, through back channels, through European intermediaries, through Oman, actually. And there was this growing sense in the foreign policy world, at least, that maybe we were getting somewhere. And then Netanyahu sits down with Trump, and he tells him face to face that he doesn't think a deal is going to happen. Now ask yourself, why would he say that? I mean, think about it. Netanyahu is not a stupid man. He's been in power in Israel off and on for like decades. He knows how diplomacy works. He knows you don't walk into a meeting with the American president and just crap all over the peace process unless you have a reason. So what's his angle? Well, let's look at what else came out of that meeting, because the Iran thing wasn't the only thing they talked about. Not even close. Netanyahu also reportedly told Trump that Israel will not withdraw its troops from the buffer zone in southern Syria. Now that's a big deal. That's a really big deal, because that buffer zone, it's in the Golan Heights area. And under international law, that's Syrian territory. But Israel has been occupying it for decades. And after the civil war, after Assad hung on with Russian and Iranian help, Israel moved even deeper in the buffer zone. Look, I'm going to slow down here because this part gets confusing and it matters. Southern Syria, right next to the Israeli border. That's where Iranian-backed militias have been operating for years. Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, all those groups that Israel considers existential threats. And Israel's position has always been, we need that buffer zone to keep them away from our border. But here's what changed. After October 7th, after the Hamas attack, Israel's security posture went through the roof. They started pushing deeper into Syria, hitting Iranian targets, hitting Hezbollah weapons convoys, and they basically said, "We're not leaving." And now Netanyahu is telling Trump to his face that even if there's some kind of broader regional deal, even if the US and Iran reach some kind of agreement, Israel is not giving up that ground. So let me ask you again, why would a prime minister be so defiant, so public about his skepticism? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because think about what Netanyahu is actually saying here. He's saying, I don't believe Iran will keep its word. I don't believe a deal will hold. And I'm not going to trust American guarantees. He is, in effect, telling the President of the United States that he doesn't trust the process. And that's not nothing. That's not a diplomatic disagreement. That's a fundamental fracture in the U.S.-Israel alliance. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, but isn't Netanyahu always like this? Doesn't he always push back on American presidents? And yeah, he does. He pushed back on Obama. He pushed back on Biden. He clashed with Trump the first time around. I mean, remember when he congratulated Biden on the election before Trump had conceded? That was a whole thing. But this is different. This is happening at a moment when Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than ever before. I'm not exaggerating. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they've been reporting for months that Iran has enough enriched uranium for multiple bombs. And the US and Iran are supposedly negotiating. But Netanyahu is looking at the same intelligence we're all seeing, and he's saying, nope, not going to happen. Let me walk you through what I think is actually going on here. So the meeting, 90 minutes. That's a long time for a bilateral meeting between heads of state. Usually these things are tighter, more scripted. 90 minutes suggests they actually talked. Like really talked. Maybe argued. And we know from Israeli media reports, which are pretty good on these things, not perfect, but good, that Netanyahu came with a whole folder of intelligence. Satellite images, signal intercepts, the whole nine. And he laid it out for Trump. He basically said, look, Mr. President, Iran is playing you. They're negotiating in Vienna while they're enriching uranium in Fordow. They're talking about transparency while they're building new centrifuges underground. And they're not going to stop just because we sign a piece of paper. And then he said something that, according to one report I saw, I'm going to paraphrase here, he said, they know we can't verify what they're doing, and they're counting on that. Think about that. The Israeli prime minister is telling the American president that the deal he's trying to negotiate is fundamentally unverifiable. And if that's true, if Iran can hide their program well enough that even the Americans can't find it, then what exactly are we negotiating for? Now, here's where I want you to think about the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about Iran. It's about the entire balance of power in the Middle East. And it's about what happens when allies start pulling in different directions. Look at what else happened in that meeting. The naval blockade. That's another piece of this puzzle. So Iran has been threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. That's the narrow waterway where like 20% of the world's oil passes through. And for months, the U.S. Navy has been patrolling there, trying to keep the shipping lanes open. But Iran has been getting bolder. They've been harassing tankers. They've been flying drones over American warships. It's been getting closer and closer to an actual shooting war. And Netanyahu, I'm told, expressed real concern that the U.S. isn't taking it seriously enough. So you've got Iran pushing on one end, you've got Israel pushing on the other, and the U.S. is sitting in the middle trying to, I don't even know what they're trying to do, honestly. It's like they want a deal so bad that they're willing to ignore what's actually happening on the ground. And that's what's so dangerous about this whole situation. Because if Netanyahu is right, if Iran is not negotiating in good faith, then we're going to end up with a deal that doesn't stop them. And then what? What happens when they get the bomb? What happens when Israel feels so threatened that they decide to act unilaterally? Let me tell you something that might surprise you. Israel has done this before. In 1981, they bombed the Osirak nuclear reactor in Iraq. In 2007, they bombed a nuclear facility in Syria. Both times, they didn't ask permission. They just did it. And both times the world was shocked. And both times Israel said, we had no choice. We couldn't let them get the bomb. So when Netanyahu tells Trump he's skeptical about a deal, what he's really saying is, I don't trust this process. And if you make a deal I don't trust, I might take matters into my own hands. That's the subtext here. That's what nobody's talking about on the evening news. They're all focused on the meeting, the handshakes, the photo ops. But underneath all of that, there's a very real possibility that Israel is preparing to strike Iran on its own. And if they do, the United States will be dragged into it, whether we want to or not. So let's go back to that buffer zone in Syria for a second. Why is it so important? Because it's not just about Syria. It's about Iran's supply lines. Iran has been funneling weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon through Syria for years. They drive them across the border, through Iraq, through Syria, right to Hezbollah's doorstep. And Israel has been trying to cut those lines. The buffer zone in southern Syria is a key choke point. If Israel holds that ground, they can watch the border. They can intercept the convoys. They can hit targets before they ever reach Lebanon. So when Netanyahu says Israel won't withdraw, he's not just being stubborn. He's protecting a strategic asset that's crucial to Israel's security. And he's telling Trump, you can have your negotiations. You can have your deal with Iran. But I'm not giving up this position. And that is a fundamental disagreement between allies. The U.S. wants to de-escalate. Israel wants to contain. The U.S. wants to talk. Israel wants to act. And they're not on the same page. Now, I want you to think about the timing of all this, because this meeting didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened just days after Iran announced they'd be installing new centrifuges, advanced ones, the kind that can enrich uranium much faster. And it happened just weeks after the IAEA reported that Iran had stockpiled enough highly enriched uranium for a weapon. So Netanyahu is meeting with Trump at a moment when the intelligence community is sounding alarms. And he's looking at the same intelligence. And he's thinking, you know what? This isn't going to work. And maybe he's right. I mean, think about it. Iran has been violating the nuclear agreement for years. They've been cheating. They've been lying. And every time they get caught, they just move the goalposts. They say, oh, we're just enriching for medical purposes. We're just doing research. It's all peaceful. But nobody believes that. Not the Israelis, not the Saudis, not the Europeans. And honestly, deep down, I don't think the Americans believe it either. So what do you do? If you're Netanyahu, what's your move? He's got a choice. He can trust the American diplomatic process, which has failed before. He can trust Iran to keep its word, which they never have. Or he can decide that Israel needs to take care of itself. And based on what he said in that meeting, based on his skepticism, based on his comments about the buffer zone, I think he's leaning toward option 3. Now, this is where I want to bring in something that most of the coverage is missing. Because everybody is focused on the Iran deal. They're focused on the nuclear program. They're focused on the sanctions. And those are important. But there's another piece of this puzzle that nobody's talking about. And it's the economy. Because if Israel strikes Iran, if they bomb the nuclear facilities, Iran has already said they'll retaliate by closing the Strait of Hormuz. And that means oil prices skyrocket. And that means inflation. And that means the global economy takes a hit. And in an election year, well, you can do the math. So Netanyahu isn't just making a military decision. He's making an economic decision. He's making a political decision. He's looking at the American election cycle and thinking, if we strike now, what's the response going to be? Are we going to get support? Or are we going to get cut loose? And that's the nightmare scenario for Trump. Because if Israel strikes Iran during the campaign, he's stuck. If he supports Israel, he's dragged into a war. If he doesn't support Israel, he loses his pro-Israel base. Either way, it's a political disaster. And Netanyahu knows that. He's been in politics for 30 years. He knows exactly how the American system works. He knows how to play the game. And I'm not saying he's manipulating Trump, But I'm also not saying he's not. The question is, what happens next? So let's think about the immediate future. The talks with Iran are ongoing. They're happening in Vienna. The Europeans are involved, the Chinese are involved, the Russians are involved. It's this big international circus. But if Netanyahu is skeptical, and if he's telling Trump that skepticism, then the whole process is going to be poisoned, because Israel is America's closest ally in the region. If Israel doesn't trust the deal, how can the American public? How can Congress? Already you're seeing senators on both sides of the aisle raising questions. Republicans saying, we can't trust Iran. Democrats saying, we need more verification. It's turning into a mess. And that's exactly what Netanyahu wants. Or maybe not wants, but expects. He's creating a situation where a deal is almost impossible, because he believes a bad deal is worse than no deal. And in his view, any deal with Iran is a bad deal. I'm going to say something here that might be controversial, but I think Netanyahu might be right. I mean, look at the history. Iran has been lying about its nuclear program for 20 years. They've hidden facilities. They've broken promises. They've violated resolutions. And every time they get a deal, they pocket the sanctions relief, and then they cheat again. So why would this time be different? Why would Iran suddenly decide to be honest? They're not. They're going to take whatever they can get, and then they're going to keep pushing forward. That's just who they are. And Netanyahu knows that. He's been dealing with them for decades. He's watched them lie to the UN, lie to the IAEA, lie to the Americans. He's seen it all. And he's concluded that there's no point in negotiating. But here's the thing. If there's no deal, then what? What's the alternative? Because the alternative isn't peace. It's war. It's a military strike that could spiral into a regional conflict. It's Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel. It's Iranian proxies attacking American bases in Iraq and Syria. It's the whole region going up in flames. And that's what makes this so terrifying. Netanyahu is looking at a choice between a bad deal and a war. And he's leaning toward the war, because he thinks a war is less dangerous than a nuclear Iran. Now, I'm not saying that's the right call. I'm not saying it's the wrong call. What I'm saying is, this is the conversation they're having in Washington. This is what those 90 minutes were about. And while the official readouts talked about cooperation and commitment and shared values, the real conversation was about two allies who see the world differently. Two leaders who are trying to figure out how to handle a threat that neither one trusts the other to handle. That's the story here. That's what everybody's missing. So let me ask you something. What do you think happens next? Because if Netanyahu is right about Iran, if they're really just stalling for time, then the clock is ticking. And we're going to have to make a choice. Do we accept a nuclear Iran? Do we strike them? Or do we hope that sanctions somehow work this time? The last one, sanctions. They've already tried that. It didn't work. Iran is richer now than they were 5 years ago. They've been selling oil to China, to India, to anybody who'll buy it. They're not hurting. They can afford to wait. So if sanctions don't work, and negotiations don't work, and diplomacy doesn't work, what's left? I'll tell you what's left. Military action, either by the U.S. or by Israel, or both. And that is the real fear in Washington right now. Not just the fear of a nuclear Iran, but the fear of a war that nobody wants, but nobody can stop. Because once the bombs start falling, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Iran will retaliate. Hezbollah will retaliate. The Houthis in Yemen will launch missiles at Saudi Arabia. It's going to be chaos. And the United States, no matter what Trump says, is going to get pulled in. We have bases in the region. We have allies in the region. We have interests. So we're not going to be able to stay out of it. That's the nightmare scenario. And it's exactly what Netanyahu is preparing for. So here's where I want to leave you, because I think this is the part that matters most. We've been watching this situation for months, years, decades, and it's always been the same. Iran gets closer, Israel threatens, the world negotiates, and nothing changes. But this time I think something is different. I think Netanyahu has run out of patience. I think he's looked at the intelligence, looked at the diplomacy, looked at the history, and he's decided that he can't wait anymore. And I think that's what he told Trump in that 90-minute meeting. Not in so many words, but in the subtext, in the skepticism, in the refusal to withdraw from Syria. He said, Mr. President, we're on our own. And whether that's true or not, whether America abandons Israel or backs them up, it doesn't really matter. Because Israel is going to do what Israel is going to do. And that is the most dangerous thing of all. Because once Israel acts, there's no going back. So I'm going to leave you with this thought, and I want you to hold on to it. The next few months are going to decide the fate of the Middle East, maybe the world. And the decisions being made in that meeting, in that 90-minute conversation between two leaders who don't fully trust each other, those decisions are going to shape everything that comes after. Netanyahu is skeptical about Iran. He's skeptical about the process. He's skeptical about America's commitment. And the question is, should we be too? Thanks for sticking with me through this whole breakdown. I know it was a lot. But this stuff matters, and I wanted to make sure you had the full picture. I'm going to be watching this closely because I think we're about to see something we haven't seen in a long time. And whatever happens, it's not going to be quiet. I'll see you in the next one.